Welcome back. All right, so at some point this summer, I'll have reenactments done at some kind of a meetup. That's the plan, anyways, for what stick fouls and various penalties might look like. And again, I'm saying might look like. So for people who are saying, "Oh, this is cool, Shannon's going to allow me to smack people with my stick," not really. But it is interesting because I mean I can talk about it here in the studio, and I can have my brand new stick handy to discuss all this. But when you're talking about slashing, hooking, spearing, cross checking, these are all calls that are not necessarily made the same from the start of the year until the finish of the year. And I get it. It's game 7. It's the third period. It's a tie game. You don't want to see it decided by a penalty. But what just took place in the game might have been a slash, hook, cross check, spear, not necessarily, but I'll come back to that. And you don't want to see that play influence what happens the rest of the way. So for a referee to make these calls, it has to be, did that cause a scoring chance? Did that deny a scoring chance? And if the answer is no, then you let them play. And I think most hockey fans are perfectly fine with the let them play mantra, right? But for new fans coming into the game, and this will go into the Hockey 101 playlist, it can be confusing. Because you watch a game and go, that's a slash. And the fan sitting next to you who might be a longtime fan goes, that's a slash in October. It's not a slash now, it's March. And then you're sitting in the second round of the playoffs to get next to them. So that was a slash in March. Yeah, but it's not a slash in the second round of the playoffs. They're just letting him play. Oh, okay. So it's that sliding scale that we get used to, right? Where what the NHL calls for 1 month, they don't call for the next, and so on and so on and so on. And at the start of the year, you'll see ridiculous amounts of power plays, but by the time you get to the playoffs, you don't. Not usually, even though the hockey's not cleaner. Not usually. In fact, it can sometimes be a lot worse, and especially the stick fouls. The stick fouls are where you're going to see a lot of complaining. Cross-checking I've talked about. I've done a whole video on cross-checking, so I didn't want to do a video just on cross-checking again today. I feel like I've covered that a couple of times, and we'll talk about it during the summer. Again, the whole meetup thing, right? But cross-checking, they don't call it consistently. And again, it's you have your stick in your hands here, and you just with it two-handed, you're basically forcefully checking somebody else, usually in the back, and they don't call it. And it's weird because according to the rule book, they're supposed to. But, and again, a lot of hockey purists will say no, and a lot of hockey players will say, hey, they're just letting him play. For all you pinheads on the internet, they're just letting him play, and that's perfectly fine. So why does, and again, then the question I ask is, so why have the rule at all then? Because if it's going to be fine, okay, then just take it out of the rule book. And I don't say that to be sarcastic or anything. I say that because if we're going to agree that certain plays aren't penalties in the third period, in overtime, in the second round of the playoffs, why is it a penalty in October? So there's that sliding scale that goes one way and should go the other, which is then why not just take it right out? If we're going to agree that play where a guy gets hit with a stick, gets cross-checked, is not a penalty. If we're going to agree that a slash, where you take your stick, and it's basically a north-south motion with slashing a lot of the time, depending on, or it can be swinging sideways too, but a sideways swing, and then you sort of get into the motion here that's more of your spearing and slashing are. Again, I think you could take slashing and spearing and combine them into one penalty. I do. I think, and you just, I don't know what you call it, stick foul. You could take almost all these and just say stick foul. He's going to the box for 2 minutes for a stick foul. And as weird as it would sound, it might kind of clear things up. Then you have, these are the things you're allowed to do with your hockey stick to try to stop your opponent. And these are the things you're not allowed to do. Hooking is mainly a keep the game wide open. Hooking, the holding, clutching, grabbing that was just so bad in the game in the 90s and early 2000s. They finally cracked down on it, and it's nowhere near what it used to be, which shows that players can adapt. And players would adapt if the rule book was changed. And if they started calling these penalties with a more consistent tone, players would adapt. Everybody complains with Tom Wilson. I'm going to use him as an example again. Knows where the line is, knows what he can get away with, and so he rides that line. He knows what he can get away with. Brad Marchand for the Bruins knows what he can get away with, knows what he can't. So we can all have the discussion about, whether or not we feel like those players belong in the game and all that, but they know where that line is. And there's a lot of other players who maybe aren't as prominent, maybe aren't as well known, but they know what they can get away with and what they can't. And when it comes to stick fouls, they're pretty confident, yeah, I can get away with that slash. The weird thing with slashing is that it was very recently changed so that any stick on the hands was a penalty. And that's because of Sidney Crosby lopping off the fingertip of Mark Mathot. And when we saw that, that was horrific. The pictures were everywhere on the internet, and the NHL reacted, which is the problem I have with NHL rules and the way that they do things. They react. We now have a review on all 5-minute power plays. Why? Because the Cody Eakin situation happened with Vegas and San Jose, and they saw afterwards that call wasn't made properly, and so they brought in the instant replay for 5-minute majors because of that play. And so we have that now. It's a 5-minute major. We're going to review it, make sure we got the call right. And I'm not in favor of having replay on every single penalty, but should a team be allowed to challenge a penalty? Probably. And it should probably be the same rule as you have for challenging a goal for goalie interference. If you're wrong, then you get an extra penalty. So, there's some risk there. But for a coach who's looking at it like the high stick, now we have things with it's a high stick. I don't even have high sticking on here because it's pretty universally called. It's very rare that you'll see a guy get hit in the face with a stick and the ref goes, nah, unless it's a follow-through. Follow-throughs are okay. So if you're winding up for a shot and your stick comes back and catches somebody in the face, that's a penalty. If you're following through on a shot or a pass and your stick hits somebody in the face, that's a follow-through. It's not a penalty. Which is weird when you think about it. Because you're told that you're always responsible for your stick. But if you're not responsible in the follow-through, then you're not responsible in the follow-through, but you're responsible on the wind-up. It is bizarre. But with cross-checking, I've had this discussion. Like I said, we've done a video before on what they call and what they don't. It's frustrating to me as a longtime fan because I'll watch a game, and sometimes in the same game you'll see a cross-check that is called versus a cross-check that isn't, and they look virtually identical. But you'll hear the announcer say, well, yeah, but that was the fourth cross-check. They're going to let them get away with the first three, but not the fourth. Or, well, that was a little bit harder of a cross-check than the other one. Well, again, do we measure high sticks by how hard they are? Now, we do have a 4-minute high stick if it draws blood, and that's the only way. That's the only kind of injury you can have is one that draws blood, which shows just how weird that rule is. You can get hurt without actually bleeding. I think we all have experienced that, where something can hurt way worse when you're not actually bleeding, and yet that's the rule, right? 4 minutes for high stick because it drew blood. And you can get a 5-minute high stick if it's intent to injure, right? Which, again, then you're arguing intent, and there's a slippery slope with that as well. But we don't see a lot of those high sticks. We really don't. I remember when helmets came in, because I'm that old, and the argument was if you bring in everybody has to wear a helmet, we're going to see stick work go completely bonkers. And then we didn't. You can't mandate visors, because if you bring in all these visors, stick work's going to go completely crazy. And it didn't. It really didn't. Players in general are not nearly as rough with their sticks as was predicted, say, 30, 40 years ago. And again, when you talk about changing the game, you will get all of the exact same arguments. That any argument in favor of enforcing some of these rules or changing some of them, and with the stick work, it's not necessarily as loud as it is when you talk about some of the more physical penalties, but it's the same thing about, it's gonna turn into soccer. It's gonna turn into no contact. Nobody in the world is asking for that. It's just not a thing. It just isn't. But calling these more universally, I'm in favor of. But I don't know that the NHL will. Again, the spearing only got called because an ugly incident took place. The 5-minute penalties are reviewed because there was an ugly incident that took place that a lot of people said, hey, that probably shouldn't have been a 5-minute penalty right there. And again, we still have a debate about whether or not it would have been. But the NHL, in bringing in the replay rule, is basically saying we don't think that probably should have been a 5-minute penalty, but we won't come out and say anything negative about officials, so we're going to change the way that it's reviewed. I really do wonder at what point do we get some sort of comprehensive change when it comes to the little spearing thing. Like last night, Barzal gets speared. He's in the game. He scores the game-winning goal. He's okay. Next time out, is somebody else okay? No idea. Krejci gets cross-checks in the back. Are they penalties? No. And again, I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but by NHL standards in the playoffs, those aren't a penalty. You can take those little cross-checks in the back of a guy. It doesn't matter. If he has back problems, doesn't matter. The NHL's officiating standard has made it so those little cross-checks are not penalties. Could they be? Yes. Are they against the rules? Absolutely. Like I said, I've gone through cross-checking before, but they don't call them. So I don't know that there necessarily is a solution. Is there a problem? Yeah, because we're still having this discussion. We're still discussing stick fouls. We're still seeing slashes during games. We go, well, wait, that was worse than the slash that they called a penalty in the first period. Why aren't they calling it here? Or this one in the third that they're calling a penalty for. They didn't call that penalty in the first. And then we all end up fighting amongst ourselves. And I honestly am not sure what the answer is. But I've always said more consistency. There needs to be more consistency. We haven't seen it. I don't think we're going to see it. And I feel bad for the officials because they have marching orders. They get told, here's what a penalty is, here's what it isn't. Here's what we're enforcing, because I've seen that, during the last 3 seasons where I've been doing all these previews and reviews, where I've noticed that all of these penalties are being called today that weren't being called yesterday. So the NHL gave marching orders to the officials. Watch for these fouls. Watch for these incidents. Don't pay as much attention to this because certain things that were called last night aren't called tonight. So again, we get mad at the refs. The refs basically are told, here's what you're allowed, here's what you're not. And so they're following the rules set down by the NHL, because if they don't get to go to the next round. Players are eliminated from round to round, so are officials. Each round, you see the officials get knocked out of calling playoff games that the NHL, through their own grading scale, don't feel are up to par with the other ones that are still calling games. So when you get to the Stanley Cup final, those, in the NHL's opinion, with how they grade officials, they're the best ones. They're the best ones at calling the game they feel both fairly and the way they want it being called. So again, people always get mad at the refs. Sometimes it's referees that may not have a great grasp of the game. Sure. But in general, by the time you're a National Hockey League referee, you've been a referee for a while. You've refereed at various levels. It's not like they just, point at somebody in the crowd and go, hey, you, Bob, get a jersey on. We'll give you a ref's jersey. You're out there for tonight. We'll give you like a 10-minute prep for what the fouls are for tonight. It doesn't happen. But it's a thankless job too. All right. So there you go. Stick fouls. Should they call them more consistently? My answer is yes. Are they going to? My answer is probably not. But we'll see. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below on what you think they should or shouldn't let go. Should it be different at different times of the year? And why or why not? Thank you guys so much for all your support. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happen upon this video. And like I said, we'll go into detail on each of these at a later date when I'm out and about and I'm able to hang out with the guys, and we can do the demonstrations of each penalty without hurting each other. I'm just throwing that out there, without hurting each other. Okay? So that's important. So no full-on spearing of each other, because, yeah. All right. Thanks again for all your support, and I will talk to you again soon.